Thank you for joining me on another episode of The Adaptive Man. I'm your host, Michael Reed, and we're going to continue another episode today with our series on men's emotions, or emotions in general, we're being honest, on a men's guide to emotions. Today, in particular, we're going to be diving into grief. Grief is one of those things that I think many men, when they hear the word, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, that's what you feel when somebody dies, right? Or, when something really sad that happens, you lose a loved one, you lose a pet you've had for a long time, you lose a loved one, you lose a job, you lose a major life changes. This is true. It is something you do feel in those circumstances. But it tends to be misunderstood in this very narrow concept, narrow range of things that people would attribute to being worthy of grief or grieving. So, in this context, what I want to try to do is outline a different way of thinking about what grief is, what it means to grieve, why it's so important, how old it actually is, and how to actually start going through it more effectively to start letting it adapt its way into your life, the way it's going to integrate it into your life on a healthier, regular basis. So before we even jump into this, though, we have to understand that grief is an emotion, and emotions are basically functions of what the brain and the body does. But one of the big things to understand about how the brain and the mind and the body work in particular is that the brain is essentially mostly your subconscious, essentially is a prediction machine. You don't know with 100% certainty what's going to happen next, but you have a pretty good idea. The majority of what your brain does, a lot of what your subconscious mind does, is tries to take in information from the environment, mix it in with what you're already experiencing in your life, and try to do a general prediction of what is going to happen next in front of you. Your brain is constantly trying to predict reality based on past experiences, expectations, beliefs, patterns, routines, behavior systems, all these things you've been picking up since you were basically an infant up until however old you are now. And grief in itself is a very, 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 very old emotion. Just like in the last episode, we talked about anger being a very old emotion. Lots of different animals and lots of different organisms have some form of grief. But in the sense that if the brain is a prediction engine, it's almost like a computer trying to predict reality, grief can be thought of as something of almost like a software update, meaning your interpretation, your prediction of reality wasn't actually what you expected to happen. You were expecting a certain thing, and then something else happened along the way instead. This can be small things such as somebody cutting you off on the road when you're off to work, or even hitting traffic when you usually don't hit traffic, or expecting certain things in your life. Maybe you go to the supermarket, you have certain foods in your life, and they run out of it. Depending on how much you've gone through a particular pattern or behavior routine where it wasn't interrupted, where it wasn't disrupted from that pattern, may be proportional to how much of a physical impact you feel of like confusion when that thing doesn't happen the way you're expecting it to. So in a way, it's almost like your mind has to go through a process to update what reality is, because it was thinking it was going to be one thing, ended up being something else. Essentially, in a nutshell, grief begins when reality contradicts the internal model that you had going on in your mind. Every day, all the time, you're constantly going through these little moments of almost like micro grief, where maybe if you almost trip and fall, or maybe you do trip and fall. Prior to that moment, the odds are your brain was not expecting you to trip and fall, which is why in those moments it can be embarrassing, it can be awkward, it can almost sit there in confusion as to why it happened. Because again, your brain was not expecting a fall to happen. Your brain was not expecting certain things to happen in your life. When you get a unexpected phone call about a loved one who passed away, or you go to your work, your job, and you get fired unexpectedly, or all these things, more often than not, the grief comes again in proportion to the severity of the change that is happening. So ultimately, if grief is a process of updating the internal model to reality, then all the symptoms we may go through in the grieving process become stages of the brain trying to go through it itself and trying to go through that software update. Very classically, when we think of grief, we think of the 5 stages of grief, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. In a way, it's almost like the mind is saying with denial that this didn't actually happen. My interpretation of reality is still correct. I just need to wait until reality just catches up to what's actually supposed to be happening. Anger might say, this should not have happened. Maybe if I can generate energy of some sort to change the output of reality in some sort, in some way, then I don't have to go through this grieving process of updating the model because the model is still accurate. If only I could just exert energy, if I can exert some anger towards the situation. Perhaps bargaining might be looked at as maybe how I can undo it. Maybe I can exchange something for something else to not go through this software update, not go through this updating of reality. Depression essentially might be the main updating process. If you can imagine downloading an update on your computer or your phone, and it says we're going through a software update and it kind of starts counting down to percentages, that might be the body's form of depression where you're going into a more relaxed, more heavier state because your brain, your mind is going through a massive amount of rewiring, neurological and psychological rewiring of letting go of old memories, changing some pathways, acknowledging things are not going to be the same way they were before. Simplest example to think about, even from my life, was when my mother passed away. I was 25 years old when my mother passed away from cancer unexpectedly. About a year and a half, when I was about 23 and a half years old, we found out she had cancer. And there were, when I first heard the news, I remember the day that I was walking out into the parking lot of a gym I was just working out at, and I had the news, heard the news, and it almost like hit me like a ton of bricks. My body felt heavy. I didn't really feel like I was there. Like I kind of felt almost dissociated within my own skin. I couldn't really feel much. And it was heavy denial. It was a heavy amount of denial hitting my system because that is a massive expectation. I was not expecting to get a phone call from my father to saying, by the way, we just found out your mother has cancer. Because for 23 and a half years, up until that moment, there was no such thing as a cancer diagnosis in my version of reality, my model of reality that I had up until that point. And now, just projecting to the future, hearing possible cancer diagnosis, all the associations with cancer, all the associations of what could happen with it, what the outcomes are like, what's the likelihood of success, what's going to happen in the future, became too much for my mind to handle. And it caused almost a bit of an involuntary shutdown, which was the denial process as the first stage of grieving the new reality, which is my mother has cancer. Later on, there was a lot of anger involved and thinking, why couldn't we have predicted this? Why couldn't we have done something about this? Well, maybe we could have, we should have been eating cleaner. We should have been exercising more. We should have gone out for more walks. We should be drinking more water. And maybe I knew this was going to happen. And who knows? There's a million reasons to why it happened. But regardless, that anger did come along the way. Bargaining, thinking about ways you can maybe start changing diets now. Maybe we could, cut out the junk food, cut out this, and start exercising, start eating clean. And maybe there's certain things we do. Maybe some money we can pour into certain chemotherapies and whatnot. Maybe there's a way to exchange something in exchange for this not happening. Maybe there's a way we can get rid of the cancer in a way. And then the depression came shortly after she passed away, which was very heavy, and it took a long time. And the crazy thing with the grieving process, especially in grief in general, again, if it is a software update for your mind, and was for my mind when this happened to me, you, as a man, fortunately or unfortunately, you actually have some capacity to interrupt the process, which can be beneficial if you're at a point where you're in your life where sitting down and moving through the heaviness, letting your body feel heavy, letting tears fall, your eyes swell puffy, you're shaking, you're feeling like crap, you want to cry, you want to scream, these are all biological, physiological processes of emotional digestion and grieving that your body needs to go through in order to do that software update. But if you don't allow yourself to move through it, you can actually get stuck in grief. You can get stuck in forms of undigested grief that can sit with you for years and years and years and just weigh in the back of your mind, almost like it's taxing the system. It's taxing your computer. It's not going with that software update as it needs to. And now the system's not working as efficiently as it could because there's some outdated versions of a program in the background that's still running that needs to be updated. For me personally, she passed away when I was 25, and I don't think I actually fully let myself feel the complete full impact of her death for close to 10 years. It wasn't until I was about 33, let's say about 8 or 9 years later, 33, 34 years old, when I started to notice myself feeling very emotionally heavy when I would listen to songs associated with her, or have memories that pop up associated with her, or things like to do associated, or even when it first happened, it was weird to not be able to pick up the phone and have her answer anymore. It was weird to not be able to text her and have her respond to text anymore. But this could be anything. This could be your job. This could be your relationship. This could be your family. This could be your marriage. This could be, like the house that you live in, the car, the place that you live. Your mind has an association of this predictive reality of you live in a certain place, you have a certain job, you have a certain relationship, you have a certain amount of money, and you have these problems, but not these problems over here. And then one day you get slapped with divorce papers. Your house gets put up, for like something. Your house explodes. Your car breaks down. Your pet dies. Your job fires you. Something crazy happened that caused a massive disruption to your sense of predictive reality, and now you have to go through like process of updating that version of reality in your mind. And again, if you don't allow yourself to move through this update process, it can literally start taxing the system the way an outdated program or faulty software can tax your computer. And even visibly, grief may have evolved evolutionarily as a social visible reason for reason. Socially, let me rephrase that. Socially visible for a reason. When you go through the grieving process, you might cry. You might want to not talk. You might be regressive. You might want to just shelter off and contain and don't want to talk to people and things like that. It's a way of involuntarily communicating on a body language level to other people. Something has happened. I'm not operating normally right now. I'm going through a bit of a system update right now. And there's a good line in popular psychology spaces that grief demands a witness. And generally speaking, the subconscious mind, the body, the nervous system does not like going through heavy psychological processes unless it knows it is safe. And oftentimes, safety is being in the physical and nervous system presence of another person that you feel subconsciously nervous system safe with. This could mean talking to a counselor, talking to a therapist, talking to a coach of some sort. There's grief counselors, grief therapists, grief coaches, working with another man, perhaps who's been through this before, who understands what it feels like, and not inducing any other other emotions along the way, such as a lot of men might feel shame about having grief in the first place because it's not manly to cry. It's not manly to, be upset that things happen. Oh, fuck it. Life just happens. No big deal. We can just blow it off. It's okay. Shit happens. Move on. Yeah, it's true. It does happen. But you still need to let your body and your mind go through that software update process. And it may take time. It may take a long time. It may come in waves. It may come unexpectedly at times. Having the capacity to find somebody to sit down with and let yourself talk through and go through those psychological updates while it's taxing to the body. You're going through changes in in your mind. Your memories are being clipped and changed, and you're crying for no reason. You're heavy. You don't want to talk to anyone. Your body language is different. It's a process. It's a process of updating the body to the new reality, to the new world, wherever it may be. And if you don't go through this process in a healthy way, your body, much like we talked about in the first episode about the emotional overview, will just store it for later on. And when you least expect it, it'll come out, or it'll start to tax you physically. It starts to lead to health conditions and health issues. There's plenty of data and research suggesting how undigested emotional processes, like these little software updates that are just sitting in the background of your mind, will start to create an undue burden on your body, especially as a man. So finding somebody you can sit down with, could be a close friend, a male mentor, a coach, a therapist, somebody to move through it with, to actually tackle this grief in a healthy way. Having somebody that you trust to witness, to create that extension of your nervous system while you move through the process so that you can actually let it go, so you can move through it, so you can digest it, is going to be integral to actually properly grieving. But I hope this helps in some sense. I hope you as a man, or if you know another man who may be going through some heavy grief, who's been in denial about moving through his grief, to understand that grief is not your mind failing to move on. Grief is your mind learning how to live in a world that's changed. And those changes could be tiny, they could be massive. Whatever it is, the best version of yourself is going to be the version that allows yourself to digest and move through the grief, however it shows up in your life. If you found this informative, I really appreciate it. If you want to leave a comment, drop a like, share this with somebody you know, give me some feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your thoughts are on grief. Maybe you've been working through at your own pace, whatever it could be. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good day.